The stranger, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke, noticed her from a distance, kneeling in the dirt among wooden crosses that leaned at angles like broken teeth, and he knew immediately that something about this scene would change the course of his life forever. Nathan Jacobson had been riding through the Nevada territory for 3 weeks straight, his pack horse laden with furs and dried meat from a winter spent in the Ruby Mountains. The year was 1871, and spring had finally broken the mountain's icy grip, sending him down toward civilization with months of solitude still clinging to his clothes like pine smoke. His hair hung past his shoulders, dark as crow feathers and tied back with a strip of leather, and his arms strained against the fabric of his shirt with every movement. Years of splitting wood, hauling game, and surviving in country that killed weaker men had carved his body into something that looked hewn from granite, rather than born from a woman. He had planned to pass straight through Unionville without stopping, maybe trade his furs in Austin instead, but the sight of that lone figure in the cemetery on the hill made him rein in his horse. Something about the way she moved, the careful precision with which she placed wildflowers on each grave, the utter isolation of her task, spoke to a loneliness he recognized in his own bones. Nathan dismounted, his boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. The woman did not look up. She wore a faded calico dress that had been mended so many times the original pattern barely showed through, and her honey-colored hair was pinned up beneath a bonnet that had seen better days. Her hands were raw and cracked, the hands of someone who had been working without rest. He approached slowly, leading his horses, not wanting to startle her. The cemetery sat on a rise overlooking what remained of Unionville, a silver mining town that had boomed 5 years prior, but now showed signs of the bust that inevitably followed. Half the buildings stood empty, their windows like hollow eyes staring at nothing. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She jerked upright, spinning to face him, and he saw her face properly for the first time. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with features that would have been lovely if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. Her eyes were the color of summer sky, but they held the kind of grief that aged a person from the inside out. "I did not mean to frighten you," Nathan said, stopping a respectful distance away. She pressed a dirt-stained hand to her chest, breathing hard. "You move quietly for a man your size. Habit from the mountains." He gestured to the graves she had been tending. There were 7 of them, their markers simple and crude. "You taking care of these all alone?" Something flickered across her face, a pain so raw that Nathan felt it like a physical blow. "There is no one else left to do it." He waited, sensing she would say more if given the space. "My name is Catherine Dawson," she said finally. "Those graves hold everyone I ever loved in this world. My parents, my 2 brothers, my sister, her husband, and their baby daughter." Her voice remained steady, but her hands twisted in her apron. "Fever came through 6 weeks ago. Took them all within a fortnight." Nathan had seen death in many forms during his 30 years. He had buried friends, watched men freeze in blizzards, and found the remains of those who had bet against the wilderness and lost. But there was something particularly cruel about fever, the way it could sweep through a household and leave nothing but silence in its wake. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. Catherine bent back to her work, pulling weeds from around a small cross. "Everyone is sorry. Sorry does not bring them back. Sorry does not make the banker stop demanding payment on land my father bought. Sorry does not put food in my belly or keep the roof from leaking when it rains. You have been living alone since they passed. I have nowhere else to go, no family in any other state. My mother came from Philadelphia, but her people disowned her when she married a miner. My father's family died in the war." She sat back on her heels, staring at the graves with an expression that made Nathan's chest tighten. "I tried to keep our claim going, but I am one woman with a pickaxe and no knowledge of mining. The Silverton Company offered me $50 for the whole thing. $50 for what my father spent 10 years building." Nathan lowered himself to sit on a flat rock nearby, letting his horses graze on the scrub grass that dotted the hillside. He should have kept riding. He had business in Austin, and the longer he delayed, the worse price he would get for his furs. But something rooted him to this spot, watching this young woman tend graves with a devotion that spoke of love undiminished by death. "Where will you go when the bank takes the land?" he asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not know. I have been trying not to think about it." The sun climbed higher, beating down on them with the relentless intensity of the Nevada desert. Catherine finished her work, arranging the last of the wildflowers she had gathered, and stood. Her dress was dusty at the knees, and when she swayed slightly, Nathan was on his feet in an instant. "When did you last eat?" he asked, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Yesterday morning, I think, or maybe the day before." She pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. "I have cornmeal left and some dried beans." Nathan made a decision then, one that came from a place deeper than logic or reason. "Come down to the town. Let me buy you a proper meal." "I do not take charity." "It is not charity if you do something in return," he said. "I have been in the mountains all winter. I do not know the current news, the state of the mining operations, or what trails are safe to travel. You can tell me what I need to know." "Fair trade." She studied him with those two old eyes, weighing his words for deception. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Very well, but just a meal." They walked down the hill together, Nathan leading his horses, and Catherine walking beside him with the careful steps of someone conserving energy. Unionville stretched before them in a wide gulch, its main street lined with buildings in various states of abandonment. A few businesses still operated. The assayer's office, a general store, 2 saloons, and a boarding house that doubled as a restaurant. The eyes of every person they passed tracked Catherine with a mixture of pity and speculation. A few men tipped their hats, but no one approached or offered help. Nathan had seen this before in dying towns. People became so focused on their own survival that they had nothing left to spare for others. Even a young woman recently orphaned. They entered the boarding house, and the proprietor, a heavy-set woman with steel-gray hair, looked up from her counter. "Catherine, honey, you finally decided to take up Mrs. Patterson's offer." "No, Mrs. Henderson. I am just here for a meal." Catherine's spine straightened, pride keeping her upright despite her obvious exhaustion. "Mrs. Henderson's gaze shifted to Nathan, taking in his size, his buckskins, the rifle strapped to his saddle. "You are one of the mountain men. We do not get many of your kind through here anymore." "Just passing through," Nathan said. "We will take whatever you have hot and plenty of it." They settled at a table near the window, and Mrs. Henderson brought out beef stew with actual vegetables, fresh bread, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Catherine ate with the controlled desperation of someone who had been rationing for too long, trying to maintain dignity while her body screamed for sustenance. Nathan let her eat in peace, watching the street outside and thinking. He had spent the last 5 years in the mountains after the war had taken everything he cared about back in Missouri. His parents had died when raiders burned their farm. His younger sister had succumbed to cholera in a refugee camp. And the woman he had planned to marry had wed another man when he was reported dead at Shiloh. He had survived the battle, but something in him had died there anyway, buried in the mud with thousands of other boys who never came home. The mountains had given him peace, or at least the silence he needed to keep breathing. But they had also given him a crushing isolation that he only recognized in moments like this, sitting across from another human being and remembering what it felt like to care about someone else's fate. The mine operations have mostly moved to Austin and Virginia City, Catherine said, breaking the silence. The silver here played out faster than anyone expected. Half the people left last year and more leave every month. The Silverton Company is buying up claims for nothing and will probably sit on them until prices change. She took a sip of coffee, her hands wrapped around the cup as if drawing warmth from it despite the heat of the day. As for trails, the main road north is safe enough, but there have been bandits working the route toward Carson City. They hit a supply wagon 2 weeks ago. Nathan nodded, filing away the information. What about you? If you had money, where would you go? The question seemed to surprise her. She set down her cup and stared into it as if reading tea leaves. I used to think about San Francisco. My mother told stories about it, the ocean, the fog rolling in at night. But that was a child's dream. I do not have the money for passage and I do not know anyone there. You could find work. A woman with your determination would not starve. A woman alone finds a certain kind of work in cities, Catherine said flatly. I would rather take my chances here, even if it means living in a tent after the bank takes our house. The thought of her alone in a mining camp, vulnerable to every kind of predator that circled desperate women, made something protective and fierce rise in Nathan's chest. He had no claim on this woman, had known her for barely an hour, but the feeling was there nonetheless, immediate and undeniable. Come with me, he said before he could think better of it. Her eyes snapped to his face. What? Come with me to Austin. I have a cabin in the mountains, a good one built to last. You can stay there safe and fed while you figure out what you want to do next. No obligations, no expectations. Just a roof over your head and time to grieve without worrying about where your next meal comes from. Catherine leaned back, her expression guarded. Why would you offer that to a stranger? Because I know what it is to lose everything, Nathan said simply. And because no one should have to face that alone. People do not do things from kindness, not in my experience. Then your experience has been with the wrong people. He met her gaze steadily. I am not asking you to trust me blind. Ask anyone in these mountains about Nathan Jacobson. They will tell you I keep my word. Mrs. Henderson, who had clearly been listening from her position behind the counter, spoke up. He is telling the truth, Catherine. Mountain men live by a code. They have to, or they do not survive up there. If he says you will be safe, you will be. Catherine looked between them, that terrible weariness settling over her features again. I cannot pay you, did not ask you to. I would need to bring some things. My mother's Bible, the photographs, my father's watch. Hope flickered in Nathan's chest, small but steady. We can pack whatever you need, but we should leave soon if you are coming. I want to be well away from here before word spreads that you are traveling with someone. Might give the bank ideas about trying to claim more than just the land. That decided her. Catherine nodded, her jaw set with determination. Give me 2 hours to gather my things and say goodbye. They climbed back up to the Dawson claim, a small plot of land with a cabin that had been built with more hope than skill. Nathan waited outside while Catherine moved through the house, packing her life into 2 worn saddlebags. He could hear her inside, the soft sounds of someone trying not to cry while touching objects that held memories she could never pack. When she emerged, her eyes were red but dry. She had changed into a more practical dress of brown cotton and wore a bonnet that had belonged to someone else, judging by how it sat on her head. In one hand she carried the saddlebags and in the other, a small wooden cross. "I made this for my sister's baby," she said, noticing his gaze. Her name was Emma. She was only 2 years old. Nathan took the saddlebags from her and secured them to his pack horse. "Would you like to say goodbye one more time?" Catherine shook her head. "I said everything I needed to say. If I go back up there now, I will not be able to leave." He helped her onto his riding horse, a sturdy mare named Ginger, who had carried him safely through 5 mountain winters. Catherine sat the horse well, suggesting she had learned to ride young. Nathan swung up behind her, his arms coming around to hold the reins, and tried not to notice how she fit against his chest as if made to be there. They rode out of Unionville in the late afternoon, heading northeast toward the Ruby Mountains. Behind them, the dying town shimmered in the heat, and Catherine did not look back once. The journey to Austin would take 2 days at a steady pace, and Nathan planned to camp that night near a spring he knew in the foothills. They rode in silence for the first few hours, Catherine's back straight and tense, Nathan hyper-aware of every shift of her weight against him. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine finally spoke. "Why do you live alone in the mountains?" The question was fair given that she was trusting him with her life. Nathan considered his answer carefully. "The war took everything I loved. When I came home, I found I did not fit anymore in the places I used to belong. The mountains do not care about your past. They only care about whether you can survive the winter." "I understand that," she said softly. "Not fitting anymore, losing your family the way you did, it changes a person. My father used to say that silver fever changed people too, made them strangers to themselves. He tried so hard to resist it, to remember why we came here. We were supposed to build something permanent, something to pass down." Her voice caught. "Now there is nothing to pass down and no one to pass it to." Nathan made camp near the spring as planned, a place where cottonwoods offered shade and grass grew thick enough for the horses. He unsaddled the animals while Catherine gathered fallen branches for a fire. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing such tasks all her life, and he appreciated that she did not expect to be waited on. He shot a rabbit as dusk fell, and soon had it roasting over the flames. Catherine produced a small pot from her belongings and made coffee with water from the spring, the mundane domesticity of the act striking Nathan as both foreign and deeply appealing. They ate in the firelight, and gradually Catherine began to talk. She told him about her family, not their deaths but their lives. Her father who had taught her to read from newspapers he saved. Her mother who sang while she worked and made any place feel like home. Her older brother who had dreamed of becoming a lawyer and had taught her mathematics. Her younger brother who could make anyone laugh, no matter how tired they were. Her sister who had been pregnant when she married, brave enough to claim her happiness despite the scandal it caused. They were not perfect, Catherine said, staring into the fire. We argued and frustrated each other the way all families do, but they were mine and I was never alone. Now I am the only one left who remembers them. When I die, it will be as if they never existed at all. That is not true, Nathan said. You carry them forward. Their love shaped who you are, and that does not disappear just because they are gone. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him as more than just a stranger who had offered unexpected help. Did you have someone? Before the war? A girl named Margaret. Red hair and a temper to match. We were supposed to marry after I returned. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. She got word I died at Shiloh. By the time I made it home, she was married to a shopkeeper and pregnant with his child. I do not blame her for moving on. The war made widows of many women who were never even wives. But it still hurt. Yes, It still hurt. Catherine pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the desert night turned cold. Do you ever regret going into the mountains, living alone? Sometimes, Nathan admitted. Mostly in winter when the snow gets so deep you cannot see the cabin door and the silence is so complete you forget what your own voice sounds like. But then spring comes and the ice breaks, and you remember why you chose this. No one shooting at you. No one dying in your arms. No one asking you to be more than you can be. I think I understand that too. After my family died, there were days when I was grateful to be alone because I did not have to pretend to be strong. I could just stop and let myself break. They sat together in comfortable silence, two broken people finding unexpected kinship in their shared losses. When Catherine began to nod off, Nathan spread out his bedroll for her near the fire and took his own blankets a respectful distance away. He lay awake long after she fell asleep, listening to the night sounds of the desert and wondering what he had set in motion by bringing her into his carefully constructed solitude. The next day dawned clear and already warm. They rode through country that climbed steadily toward the mountains, the desert giving way to juniper and pinyon pine. Catherine seemed less tense today, asking questions about the land, the animals, the way to read weather in the clouds. Nathan found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining the patterns of the wilderness he had made his home. He showed her how to identify game trails, which plants could be eaten in an emergency, where to find water when the obvious sources ran dry. She absorbed it all with an intensity that suggested she was storing every piece of information against future need. They reached Austin by late afternoon, and Nathan spent an hour at the trading post selling his furs and restocking supplies. Catherine waited with the horses, and he noticed how men's eyes lingered on her, calculating and hungry in a way that made his jaw clench. He hurried through his business and loaded the supplies quickly. "We should make it to the cabin before full dark if we push hard," he said, swinging back into the saddle behind her. "How much farther?" 6 hours, maybe 7. "The trail gets rough once we leave the wagon road." They climbed into the Ruby Mountains as the sun descended, following paths that were barely visible to anyone who did not know where to look. The air grew cooler, scented with pine and the last of the winter snowmelt. Catherine's excitement was palpable, her head turning to catch every glimpse of the mountain vistas that opened around each bend. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I have never been this high up before." "Wait until you see it in summer," Nathan said. "The meadows bloom with wildflowers, and the streams run so clear you can see every pebble on the bottom." Full dark had fallen when they finally reached his cabin, but the moon was bright enough to show its outline against the trees. Nathan had built it himself over the course of 2 years, choosing a site that had natural protection from wind and good sight lines in all directions. The cabin was solid, built from logs he had cut and fitted with a skill born from necessity, with a stone fireplace and real glass in the windows. He dismounted and helped Catherine down, noting how she swayed on her feet after so many hours in the saddle. "Wait here. Let me make sure no animals have moved in while I was gone." The cabin was secure, cold and dark but intact. Nathan quickly built a fire in the fireplace and lit the oil lamps, bringing the space to life. It was a single large room with a sleeping loft accessible by ladder, a real stove for cooking, shelves lined with supplies, and furniture he had made himself. Furs covered the floor and the bed, and the walls were chinked tight against drafts. When he brought Catherine inside, she stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, taking it all in. "You built this yourself, every board and nail." "Took 2 years before it was fully finished, but I did it right." "It is wonderful," she said, and there was such genuine appreciation in her voice that Nathan felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. "You have created a real home here." "It has been a shelter," he said. "I am not sure it has been a home." He carried in their supplies while Catherine explored the space with obvious delight, running her hands over the solid craftsmanship of the furniture, examining the way he had designed storage into every available space. Nathan watched her touch his things with careful reverence, and something in him eased that he had not known was tense. "You can have the loft," he said. "It is warmer up there, being closer to the roof, and there is more privacy. I will sleep down here." Catherine looked up at the sleeping loft, accessible by a sturdy ladder. "Where do you usually sleep?" "Up there, but you are a guest." "I do not want to take your bed." "You are not taking it, I am offering it." He softened his tone when he saw her struggling with the acceptance. "Catherine, you have been sleeping in a house alone with your grief for 6 weeks, barely eating, wearing yourself down to nothing. Let yourself have comfort, it is all right." She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. "I am not sure I remember what comfort feels like." Nathan made dinner from his supplies, a simple stew but hot and filling. They ate together at his rough-hewn table, and he was struck by how right it felt to have another person in this space. He had convinced himself over the years that he preferred solitude, but having Catherine here made him realize how much he had been merely enduring rather than living. After dinner, Catherine insisted on washing the dishes despite her exhaustion. Nathan did not argue, sensing she needed to contribute, to feel useful rather than merely rescued. When she finally climbed the ladder to the loft, he heard her soft exclamation of surprise at the comfortable bed up there, the real mattress stuffed with dried grass and covered with soft furs. "Thank you, Nathan," she called down, "for all of this. You are welcome. Sleep well, Catherine." He banked the fire and lay down on a bedroll he spread near the hearth, staring up at the dark beams of his ceiling. Above him, he could hear Catherine shifting, settling, and then finally going still. For the first time in 5 years, Nathan Jacobson fell asleep to the sound of another person breathing, and it was like coming home to a place he had never been before. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if they were learning steps to a dance that had always existed, but they had never known before. Nathan rose with the sun, rekindled the fire, and started coffee before Catherine descended from the loft. She would emerge tousled from sleep, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made his breath catch, and together they would make breakfast in companionable silence. He had expected awkwardness, the strain of 2 strangers forced into close quarters, but instead found an ease that surprised them both. Catherine had spent her life in the close confines of a mining family and was used to sharing space without friction. Nathan, for all his years alone, fell back into patterns of consideration he thought he had forgotten. "I need to check my traps today," he said one morning a week after they had arrived. "Would you like to come along, or would you prefer to stay here?" Catherine looked up from the bread dough she was kneading, a skill she had brought to his cabin that made his simple meals suddenly feel like something more. "Is it safe for me to come?" "As long as you stay close and do what I say if we encounter anything dangerous. But yes, it is safe." "Then I would like to come. I do not want to spend all my time hiding inside." They set out after breakfast, Nathan showing her how to move quietly through the forest, how to read the signs of animal passage, where to step and where to avoid. Catherine proved an apt student, her natural caution making her careful and observant. The traps he checked yielded 2 rabbits and a marten, and he showed her how to quickly and humanely dispatch them, how to prepare them for skinning. "My brother used to hunt," she said, watching him work. "But he never showed me how, said it was not something a lady needed to know." Up here, everyone needs to know how to survive, Nathan said. Gender does not mean much to a mountain winter. Over the following weeks, he taught her everything he knew. How to shoot and care for his rifle, how to identify edible plants, how to purify water from streams, how to build a fire in wet conditions. Catherine absorbed it all with fierce determination, as if knowing that knowledge was the only currency that truly held value in this wild place. But it was not all lessons in survival. They talked as they worked, sharing stories from before their losses had defined them. Catherine told him about growing up in Pennsylvania before her family headed west, about the green hills and the stone farmhouses, about reading books by candlelight and dreaming of adventures. Nathan spoke of Missouri before the war, of a farm that had sustained 3 generations, of a childhood spent fishing in creeks and helping his father in the fields. "You must miss it," Catherine said one afternoon as they worked together to split wood for the coming winter. She had insisted on learning this too, and though she lacked his strength, her technique was improving. "I miss who I was there," Nathan said, his axe biting deep into a log. "That boy died in the war. I cannot go back to being him any more than I can bring back the people we lost." "But you could go back to Missouri, start over." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "Too many ghosts. Every road would remind me of riding to war. Every field would show me the faces of boys I could not save. At least here the ghosts are ones I choose." Catherine paused in her work, leaning on her axe handle. "Do you think we ever stop grieving, or do we just get better at carrying it?" "I think we learn to make room for other things beside the grief," Nathan said. "Not forgetting, but not drowning either." She nodded slowly, returning to her work, and they split wood in silence as the afternoon sun filtered through the pines. As May turned to June, the mountain meadows exploded with wildflowers just as Nathan had promised. Alpine forget-me-nots, Indian paintbrush, lupine in shades of purple and blue carpeted the high country, and he took Catherine to see them, packing a lunch and spending the day in the kind of beauty that reminded them both that the world held more than sorrow. They sat on a flat rock overlooking a meadow that stretched toward peaks still crowned with snow, eating bread and cheese and dried apples while a hawk rode thermals overhead. Catherine had taken off her bonnet, letting the sun warm her face, and Nathan noticed that she looked healthier than when he had found her. The hollows under her eyes had filled in, and there was color in her cheeks that came from more than just the wind. "I had forgotten," Catherine said softly, "that things could be beautiful, that I could look at something and feel joy instead of just absence. Your family would want you to remember how to be happy. I know, but it feels like betrayal sometimes. As if by laughing or enjoying something, I am saying their deaths do not matter." Nathan understood that guilt intimately, had carried it himself for years. "They matter because you remember them. But you are still alive, Catherine. That matters too." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart beat faster. "Thank you for giving me time to remember that." Summer settled over the mountains in earnest, and with it came the long work of preparing for the next winter. Nathan had always done this alone, but with Catherine helping, the tasks became less burden and more collaboration. They hunted together, smoked meat, gathered berries, tended the small garden plot Nathan had carved from the forest clearing. Catherine threw herself into the work with determination, but Nathan noticed she was building something more than just survival skills. She was building a new life from the ruins of her old one, constructing an identity that was more than just grief and loss. She laughed more easily now, teased him about his terrible singing voice, told stories that were not always about the people she had lost, and Nathan found himself changing too. The silence he had wrapped around himself like armor began to fall away. He caught himself smiling at Catherine's observations, looking forward to their conversations, planning small surprises like picking the first wild strawberries to share with her. The cabin no longer felt like just a shelter. It felt like what Catherine had called it on her first night there, a home. It was in mid-July when Nathan finally admitted to himself what had been growing between them since that first day in the cemetery. They were down by the stream that ran near the cabin, and Catherine was washing clothes on the flat rocks while he repaired a fishing creel. The afternoon was hot and she had rolled up her sleeves, her arms pale against the dark fabric of her dress. She was humming something, a tune he did not recognize, and the sound carried across the water like bird song. Nathan looked up from his work and was struck by how perfectly she fit into this landscape, this life. She was no longer a stranger he was helping, but something infinitely more precious. A partner, a companion, someone who understood the language of his solitude and spoke it fluently. "Catherine," he said, and something in his tone made her look up. Yes, he had not planned what to say, had not rehearsed or prepared, but the words came anyway, rising from a place of absolute certainty. "I am glad you came here with me." A smile curved her lips, gentle and knowing. "I am glad too. I mean more than just glad." He set aside his work and moved closer, kneeling on the bank near where she stood in the shallow water. "You have changed this place, made it into something I did not know it could be." Catherine's hands stilled in the water, soap suds clinging to her fingers. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I was not sure I wanted to anymore. That is not a small thing." "It is not charity I feel for you," Nathan said, needing her to understand. "Has not been for a long time." Her eyes widened and he watched her process his meaning, saw the moment she understood what he was trying to say. Color rose in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "Nathan," she said softly, "I am not sure I know how to be what you might need. My heart is still so broken. So is mine. Maybe that is why this fits." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, letting him help her out of the stream. "I am not asking for anything you cannot give. I just needed you to know that you have become more to me than a person I am helping. You have become someone I cannot imagine being without." Catherine stood before him, water dripping from her dress, her hand small and warm in his. "I feel the same," she admitted. "I tried not to, told myself it was too soon, that I was confusing gratitude with something else. But it is not gratitude I feel when you smile at me. It is not gratitude that makes me listen for your footsteps every morning." Nathan reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his rough palm. She leaned into the touch, her eyes falling closed for a moment before opening again to meet his gaze. "We do not have to rush," he said. "We have time." "Do we?" Catherine asked. "I thought I had time with my family, but time is not guaranteed, Nathan. Sometimes it is stolen in the space of a fortnight." He understood what she was saying, the lesson that loss had branded into both of them. Tomorrow was not promised. The only guarantee was this moment, right now, and what they chose to do with it. "What do you want?" Nathan asked. "I want to stop being afraid," Catherine said. "I want to let myself care about someone again, even though I know how much it can hurt. And I want that someone to be you." Nathan kissed her then, gently at first, mindful of her grief and his own capacity to overwhelm. But Catherine responded with a need that matched his own, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be. Tender and fierce, hesitant and certain, a promise and a question all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I will take care of you, I swear it." "And I will take care of you," Catherine said. "That is how this works, is it not? We take care of each other. Yes, that is exactly how it works. They stood together by the stream as the water sang over stones and the pine forest breathed around them, two wounded people finding healing in each other's touch. Nathan had thought his capacity for love died with everything else the war had taken, but Catherine had proven him wrong. His heart, battered and scarred as it was, still knew how to open for the right person. The days after their confession were sweeter somehow, charged with a new awareness that made every mundane task feel significant. Nathan found excuses to touch Catherine as they worked, his hand on the small of her back as he passed her in the cabin, his fingers brushing hers when she handed him tools. She returned these touches with her own, learning the map of him through small gestures that spoke of growing intimacy. They took to sitting together in the evenings, Catherine leaning against Nathan's shoulder as they watched the fire, his arm around her waist in a way that felt as natural as breathing. They talked about the future cautiously, aware that neither of them had dared to plan beyond the next season. "What do you want?" Catherine asked one night. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Nathan was quiet for a long time, considering. "I want this," he said finally. "A home, someone to share it with, a life that is not just about survival. I want to wake up and feel grateful for the day instead of just relieved I made it through the night. That does not seem like too much to ask. It is more than many people get." Catherine tilted her head back to look at him, the firelight catching gold in her hair. "I want children someday. I know it is early to say such things, but after losing Emma and watching my mother cry for every baby she lost before they were born, I want life. I want to fill this beautiful place with people who can be happy." The longing in her voice made Nathan's throat tight. He had not let himself think about children, about a family, since Margaret married someone else. But the image Catherine painted, of this cabin filled with young voices, of teaching sons and daughters to respect the mountain's power and beauty, settled into his chest like it had always belonged there. "I would like that too," he said hoarsely, "if that is something we can build together." "Is that a proposal?" Catherine asked, part teasing, part serious. "Not yet. When I ask you properly, you will know it." He kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair. "But it is a promise that I plan to ask." Catherine smiled against his chest. "Then I will wait for the question." August brought the hottest days of summer, and a visitor that reminded them the world beyond their mountain existed. Nathan had gone down to Austin for supplies, and when he returned, he brought news that made Catherine pale. "They are saying Unionville is finished," he told her as they unpacked the goods he had purchased. "The Silverton Company bought up most of the remaining claims and shut down operations. Everyone left is moving on." "The house?" Catherine asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "Sold to cover the debts. I am sorry." She nodded slowly, setting down the coffee tin she had been holding. "I thought I would feel worse, but that place was never truly home. It was just where my family happened to die." "You do not have any regrets about leaving?" "Only that I could not save them," Catherine said. "But I could not have done that whether I stayed or left. The fever did not care about my determination." She looked around the cabin, at the life they had been building together. "This feels more like home than anywhere else ever has." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she worked through the complicated emotions of losing her past even as she built her future. "You will always have a home with me," he promised, "for as long as you want it." "Forever," Catherine said against his chest. "I want it forever." 2 weeks later, Nathan made his proposal. He planned it carefully, taking Catherine to a high ridge where the view stretched for miles in every direction. They could see the valley below, the line of mountains marching toward the horizon, the endless blue of the summer sky. He had made her a ring from a silver coin he had earned years ago, hammering and shaping it with tools borrowed from the blacksmith in Austin. It was simple but solid, a circle of commitment forged by his own hands. "Catherine Dawson," he said, taking her hand as they stood in that high place with the world spread before them. "I came to the mountains to die quietly after the war took everything I loved. But you showed me that life is not about hiding from pain. It is about having the courage to risk your heart again even after it has been broken." Tears gathered in Catherine's eyes, but she was smiling, and that gave Nathan the courage to continue. "You are the strongest person I have ever met. You survived loss that would have destroyed someone weaker, and you did not let it make you bitter or cruel. You still have kindness in you, still have hope, still have love to give. And if you will have me, I would spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of those gifts." He knelt then, on the rocky ground of the mountain ridge, and held out the silver ring. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me, full of all the things we talked about, children and laughter and growing old together?" Catherine dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes, yes to all of it. I love you, Nathan Jacobson. I love your gentleness and your strength. I love how you gave me space to grieve while still showing me reasons to live. I love the home you built and the man you are. So yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if he had known the measure of her all along. They kissed there on the ridge, sealing their promise with the mountains as witnesses. And Nathan felt something he had not experienced in years. Absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. They married in early September before a circuit preacher who came through Austin. It was a simple ceremony, witnessed by Mrs. Henderson, who had made the trip from what remained of Unionville, and the blacksmith who had helped Nathan make the ring. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Nathan bought as a surprise, cream-colored with delicate embroidery she worked by lamplight. Nathan wore his best clothes, which admittedly were not much, but Catherine had insisted he was the most handsome man she had ever seen, and the way she looked at him made him feel 10 feet tall. "Do you, Nathan Jacobson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked. "I do," Nathan said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Catherine Dawson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Catherine said, her eyes locked on Nathan's face. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nathan gathered Catherine into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and laughter of their small audience. When they broke apart, both grinning, Mrs. Henderson was crying happy tears, and the blacksmith was already breaking out the whiskey he had brought for a celebration. They spent their wedding night in a room above the trading post, a rare luxury, but the next morning they headed back to the mountains, eager to return to their real home. Catherine rode in front of Nathan on Ginger, leaning back against her husband's chest, and they talked about all the plans they had. "We should expand the cabin before winter," Catherine said. "Add a room for when the children come." "I was thinking the same thing. Maybe extend it to the south where the sun will warm it best. And we need to build a proper root cellar. The one you have is too small for 2 people. Nathan smiled against her hair. "You have been making lists." "I have been preparing," Catherine said with dignity. "That is different." "I love you," Nathan said, the words still new enough to feel precious. "I love you too," Catherine replied, turning her head to kiss his jaw. "My mountain man." The winter that followed was everything Nathan had feared it might be during all his years alone, harsh, cold, and unforgiving. But everything he had feared was transformed by having Catherine beside him. Snow buried the cabin to the windows, and for weeks they could not venture more than a few feet from the door, but inside they were warm and safe and learning the rhythms of married life. Nathan taught Catherine to carve, and she spent long evenings creating utensils and toys for the children she was certain would come. He taught her to tan hides, and she made soft leather clothing that would be better suited to mountain life than her worn dresses. She taught him songs from her childhood, and they sang together while they worked, their voices rising against the howl of the winter wind. They made love in the loft, wrapped in furs against the cold, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and care they brought to everything else. Catherine was tentative at first, shy about her inexperience, but Nathan was gentle and attentive, and gradually she learned to trust the pleasure he could give her, learned to ask for what she wanted, learned that intimacy could be as much about joy as about creating life. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered one night, curled against his side in the aftermath of their lovemaking. The women in Unionville talked about marital duty as if it were a burden to be endured. "Then they married the wrong men," Nathan said, running his fingers through her hair. "Or their men did not care about their pleasure." "You care about everything concerning me," Catherine said. "Sometimes I wonder what I did to deserve such good fortune. You survived. You kept going when it would have been easier to give up. That kind of strength deserves to be rewarded." By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and revealing the world again, Catherine was pregnant. She told Nathan one morning in April, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, her eyes bright with a mixture of joy and terror. "Are you certain?" he asked, kneeling before her, his large hands covering her small one. "As certain as I can be. I have missed 2 monthly courses, and in the mornings I feel queasy. My mother was the same way with every pregnancy." Nathan pressed his forehead to her belly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this new life they had created. "I am going to be a father. Are you happy?" Catherine asked, and he could hear the vulnerability in her question. He looked up at her, his eyes stinging with tears he was not ashamed to shed. "I am more than happy. I am humbled and terrified and grateful beyond words." Catherine laughed, her own tears spilling over. "That is exactly how I feel." They held each other in the morning light, two people who had survived unimaginable loss now facing the possibility of new life, and Nathan sent up a prayer of thanksgiving to whatever force had brought them together in that cemetery more than a year ago. The pregnancy progressed through the summer and into fall, Catherine blooming with health and energy that belied the discomfort she must have been feeling. She continued to work as long as she could, helping Nathan prepare for another winter, and he found himself constantly amazed by her resilience. "You need to rest," he told her one afternoon in October, finding her hauling firewood despite her swollen belly. "I will rest when the baby comes," Catherine said with the stubborn determination he had come to know well. "Right now, there is work to be done. Let me do the heavy work. You can handle the light tasks. Nathan, I am pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been having babies and working through their entire history of existence. Not my wife, not if I can help it." He took the wood from her arms despite her protests. "Please, Catherine, for my peace of mind." She softened at that, touching his face. "All right, but only because you asked nicely." The baby came in late November, during the first real snowstorm of the winter. Nathan had ridden to Austin a month prior and brought back a woman named Mrs. Patterson who had experience as a midwife. She had been staying with them in the cabin, and when Catherine's labor began in the early morning hours, Nathan was grateful beyond measure for her presence. Labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Nathan paced the lower level of the cabin, listening to Catherine's cries, feeling helpless and terrified. Mrs. Patterson assured him everything was progressing normally, but normal felt like torture when it was his wife suffering. Finally, as the winter sun was setting and the storm raged outside, Nathan heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn. He was up the ladder in seconds, and Mrs. Patterson smiled at him from where she tended the baby. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy with a set of lungs that could wake the dead." But Nathan's attention was on Catherine, pale and exhausted against the pillows, her hair dark with sweat. "Is she all right?" "I am fine," Catherine said, her voice weak but steady. "Bring me my baby, Mrs." Patterson placed the infant in Catherine's arms, and Nathan sank down beside them, looking at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and furious, but he was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in indignation. "Hello, little one," Catherine murmured, tears streaming down her face. "We have been waiting for you." Nathan touched the baby's head with one finger, awed by the softness, the fragility, the absolute miracle of this new person. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Thomas," Catherine said. "After your father." Nathan had told her about his father during one of their long winter conversations, and the fact that she remembered that she wanted to honor that memory made his throat tight. "Thomas Jacobson. It is a good, strong name." "I hope he grows to be a good, strong man like his father," Catherine said, looking up at Nathan with so much love in her eyes that he felt undone by it. They weathered that winter as new parents, learning the rhythms of caring for an infant in the isolated wilderness. Thomas was a demanding baby, colicky and fussy, and there were nights when both Nathan and Catherine walked the floor with him, desperate to soothe his cries. But there were also moments of transcendent beauty. Thomas nursing at Catherine's breast while snow fell outside the window, the baby's first smile at 2 months that transformed his tiny face, the way he tracked Nathan's movements with eyes that were beginning to show hints of his mother's blue. "I never knew I could love something this much," Nathan admitted one night, holding his son while Catherine slept, exhausted from days of little rest. "It is terrifying. Now you understand why losing my family nearly destroyed me," Catherine said, and Nathan looked over to find her awake and watching them. "That kind of love makes you so vulnerable." "But it is worth it," Nathan said. "Even knowing the risk, it is worth it." "Yes," Catherine agreed. "Even knowing the risk." Thomas grew through that first year, transforming from a helpless infant into a curious baby who crawled everywhere and pulled himself up on anything he could reach. Catherine chronicled his development with the fierce attention of someone who understood how precious and fleeting these moments were. Nathan built additions to the cabin, a separate bedroom for them, a room for Thomas, a larger kitchen area. The cabin sprawled across the clearing now, a permanent structure that spoke of roots sunk deep and plans that extended into the far future. When Thomas was 2, Catherine became pregnant again, and this time she carried the baby with more confidence, knowing what to expect. Their daughter was born in spring, during the season of renewal, and they named her Emma after Catherine's niece who had died in Unionville. "I want her to be remembered," Catherine explained as she held the baby. "I want some part of her to live on." Emma was an easier baby than Thomas had been, content and calm, with dark hair like her brother but Nathan's brown eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his sister, wanting to help with everything, and Nathan and Catherine found themselves the parents of 2, their hands full and their hearts fuller. The years passed in the way of mountain life. Slow winters and busy summers, the constant work of survival made joyous by shared purpose. Nathan taught Thomas to hunt and track, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. Catherine taught Emma to read using the Bible her mother had carried across the country, the same way she had learned. They added a third child, another boy they named Samuel, and then a final daughter they named Grace. Their family of 6 filled the cabin with noise and chaos and laughter. The sounds of life Catherine had dreamed of during those dark days after her family's death. Nathan would sometimes stand in the doorway of the cabin and watch his family, his wife teaching their daughters to sew while the boys practiced whittling nearby, and be struck by the impossibility of his good fortune. He had come to these mountains to hide from the world, and instead, he had found everything that made life worth living. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine asked one evening, catching him in one of these moments of reflection. The children were finally in bed, and they sat together on the porch he had built, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "How I found you tending graves alone," Nathan said. "How you had no family left, how I became your home." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, their bodies fitting together after years of practice. "And you became mine. We saved each other, I think." "Is it enough?" Nathan asked. "Are you happy here, Nathan Jacobson?" "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. I have you, I have our children, I have this beautiful place. What more could I possibly want? I just want to be sure. You sacrificed so much to come here with me." "I sacrificed nothing," Catherine said firmly. "I chose this life, chose you, chose us. And I would make that choice again every single day." The children grew, as children do, becoming more independent with each passing season. Thomas at 15 was nearly as tall as Nathan and showed every sign of being the same kind of mountain man his father was. He could track game through the forest, survive alone for weeks if necessary, and had already expressed his intention to build his own cabin nearby when he was old enough. Emma at 13 was her mother's daughter, with Catherine's practical nature and gift for making any space feel like home. She had taken over much of the cooking and was teaching Grace the skills she would need to run her own household someday. Samuel at 10 was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions about the world beyond the mountains, talking about the books he wanted to read and the places he wanted to see. Nathan worried sometimes that the wilderness might not hold him, that Samuel might need the wider world in a way the rest of them did not. Grace at 8 was the baby still, wild and fearless, as comfortable in the forest as she was in the cabin. She climbed trees like a squirrel and came home with skinned knees and bright eyes, chattering about everything she had discovered. Nathan and Catherine watched their children become themselves, guiding and correcting when necessary, but mostly allowing them the freedom to grow according to their own natures. It was a life far removed from the tragedies that had brought them together, and yet those losses were never forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of her family's deaths, Catherine would spend the day in quiet reflection, and Nathan would take the children aside and tell them about the grandmother, uncles, aunt, and cousin they had never met but whose deaths had brought their parents together. He wanted them to understand that grief and joy were not opposites, but could exist side by side, that one did not diminish the other. "Your mother is the strongest person I have ever known," he told them. "She survived something that would have broken many people, and she built a life anyway. That is what strength really is, not the absence of pain but the courage to keep going despite it." When Nathan was 55 and Catherine 50, they became grandparents. Thomas had married a woman from Austin, a practical girl named Martha who took to mountain life with enthusiasm, and they had a son they brought to meet his grandparents when he was a month old. Holding that baby, Nathan was transported back to the day Thomas was born, to the overwhelming love and terror he had felt. But now there was also the perspective that came with age, the knowledge that time moved forward whether you were ready or not, that all you could do was love fiercely while you had the chance. "He looks like you," Catherine said, peering at the baby in Nathan's arms. Same serious expression. "Poor child," Nathan joked, but his voice was thick with emotion. They settled into the role of grandparents with the same dedication they had brought to everything else, being present for Thomas and Martha while respecting their independence. Emma married a few years later, to a rancher's son who built her a house in the valley where she could see the mountains where she had been raised. Samuel, true to his nature, left for California when he was 18, promising to write, and he kept that promise, sending letters full of descriptions of places so different from their mountain home that they might as well have been on the moon. Grace, surprising everyone, became a teacher in Austin, riding down from the mountain each Monday and returning each Friday, bringing education to the children of miners and ranchers who might otherwise have had none. Nathan and Catherine, their children raised and scattered into their own lives, found themselves alone in the cabin once again. But this solitude was nothing like the isolation Nathan had known before Catherine. This was the comfortable quiet of two people who had built a life together and had earned the right to simply be. They still worked, though not as hard as they once had. The garden was smaller, the hunting less frequent. Nathan's hair was more gray than black now, and his joints ached in the cold. Catherine moved more carefully, her hands showing the beginnings of the arthritis that had plagued her mother. But they were still themselves, still the mountain man and the woman he had found tending graves alone, still in love after more than 3 decades together. "Do you remember the day we met?" Catherine asked one evening. They sat on their porch, now worn smooth by years of use, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Every detail," Nathan said. "You were kneeling by those graves, putting wildflowers on each one. You looked so alone. I was alone, until you came along. I could not leave you there. Something in me knew I was meant to find you that day." Catherine took his hand, her fingers laced through his, their matching silver rings catching the last light of the day. "You gave me more than shelter, Nathan. You gave me a reason to live when I had none. You gave me family when mine was gone. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go." "You gave me the same," Nathan said. "I was just surviving before you, just existing from one season to the next. You taught me how to live again." "We saved each other," Catherine said, repeating the words she had spoken so many years before. "Yes," Nathan agreed. "We saved each other." They sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them that first night by the spring, that had witnessed their wedding, that had shone down on the births of their children and the growth of their family. The mountains stood eternal around them, the wilderness that had given them sanctuary and purpose, the home they had chosen and that had chosen them in return. Years continued to pass, measured now in grandchildren's visits and the changing seasons that marked time's passage. Nathan's body, strong as it had been, began to show the wear of a life lived hard. His back ached from years of chopping wood and hauling game. His hearing diminished, though he could still track a deer through the forest by sound alone. Catherine's sight began to fail, but she could still sew and cook and tend to the garden with the muscle memory of decades. Her hair turned completely white, but to Nathan, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her kneeling among those graves. They moved slower now, but they moved together, each supporting the other through the physical limitations that age imposed. On cold mornings, Nathan would wake early to build up the fire so Catherine would not have to rise to a cold house. She would prepare his favorite meals, knowing his appetite was not what it once was, and he needed coaxing to eat enough. Their children visited regularly, bringing grandchildren who would soon have children of their own. The cabin that had once been a solitary refuge had become the center of a spreading web of family, a place where roots went deep and branches reached wide. Thomas, now in his 50s, had become the mountain man his father had been, providing for his family from the land and teaching his own sons the skills Nathan had taught him. Emma's house in the valley was filled with the sounds of her large family, and she had become the kind of matriarch her mother had been, holding everyone together with love and practical wisdom. Samuel had stayed in California and made his fortune in business, but he never forgot where he came from, sending money and gifts and visiting when he could with stories of the wider world that satisfied Nathan's curiosity, while confirming he had made the right choice in staying in the mountains. Grace had married the school superintendent and now ran a network of schools across the territory, bringing education to places that had never had it before. "We did well," Catherine said one evening as they sat together reviewing a letter from Samuel. "Our children became good people." "They had a good mother," Nathan said, "and a good father. Do not discount your role in this, Nathan Jacobson. You showed them what it means to be strong and gentle, to survive and thrive, to face hardship without losing kindness." "We did it together," Nathan said, "like everything else." When Nathan was 68, he fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Catherine nursed him through it with fierce determination, sitting beside his bed and refusing to let him surrender to the sickness. Thomas came and stayed, helping his mother care for his father, and Emma brought medicines and remedies from town. Nathan pulled through, but the illness left him weakened in a way he had not been before. His magnificent strength, the muscular build that had defined him, began to fade. But his love for Catherine never diminished, and on days when he felt frustrated by his failing body, she would remind him of all they had accomplished, all they had built, all they had survived together. "We have had a good life," she told him one day as he sat in the chair he had made 40 years prior, looking out at the mountains he loved. "No matter what comes next, we have had so much more than most people ever get." "I know," Nathan said, "but I am not ready to leave you yet." "Then stay as long as you can," Catherine said, kissing his temple. "I am not ready to lose you either." Catherine herself remained remarkably healthy into her late 60s, her spirit undimmed even as her body aged. She moved through the cabin with the same grace she had brought to it all those years ago, still making it feel like home with her presence. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin. The place was bursting at the seams with people, and the noise and chaos would have been overwhelming to the younger Nathan who had sought solitude in these mountains. But the older Nathan, surrounded by the family he and Catherine had created, felt only gratitude and joy. 40 years, Catherine said as they sat together after everyone had gone to sleep, the cabin finally quiet again. "It seems impossible and yet not long enough." "I would live 40 more if I could, just to spend them with you," Nathan said. "We will take what we are given and be grateful for it," Catherine said, ever practical. "But yes, I wish we could have forever." They fell asleep that night as they had for 40 years, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the depths of loss and built something beautiful from the ashes of their grief. Nathan lived to be 72 before his heart finally gave out on a spring morning. He died peacefully in his sleep with Catherine beside him, passing from life into death in the same place where he had found life again. Catherine held him and wept, but through her tears, she felt grateful. They had been given 38 years together, had raised 4 children, had seen grandchildren and even great-grandchildren born. They had loved fully and deeply and without reservation. "Thank you," she whispered to Nathan's still form. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for showing me how to live again. Thank you for becoming my home." The children came and buried Nathan on a ridge overlooking the cabin, in a spot he had chosen years before because the view was beautiful, and the sunset painted the sky in colors that reminded him of hope. Catherine stood at his grave surrounded by their family, and she did not feel alone. How could she be alone when she was surrounded by the legacy of their love? She lived another 3 years after Nathan passed, staying in the cabin with Thomas and Martha, who refused to let her live alone. She spent her days teaching her great-grandchildren, telling stories of the man who had found her tending graves and had given her a reason to live. Passing on the lessons she and Nathan had learned about survival and love, and the courage it took to keep going when everything seemed lost. On a summer evening, when the wildflowers bloomed in the same meadow where Nathan had proposed so many years ago, Catherine Jacobson passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Nathan on that ridge, their graves marked with stones carved by Thomas and inscribed with simple words: Nathan Jacobson, beloved husband, father, grandfather, Catherine Jacobson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, together forever. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding to it and caring for it and remembering the story of the mountain man who had found a woman tending graves alone and had given her a home. The story was told and retold, becoming part of the family mythology, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love could find a way to bloom. And in the spring, when the wildflowers carpeted the high meadows in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada, descendants of Nathan and Catherine would make the pilgrimage to that ridge and place flowers on those graves, honoring the love that had started their family line and remembering the lesson those two had lived so fully. That home was not a place, but the person you chose to love, and that such love could transform even the deepest grief into something beautiful and enduring. The end.